When was the last time you were scared out of your wits by a movie? Halloween, the motion picture about the most terrifying night of the year. Halloween, the night 3 teenage girls discover the real trick is to stay alive.
Tommy, it's me!
Halloween, the night he came home. From Compass International Pictures, rated R.
As you can tell, I didn't manage to find a wrench, but I did find a pail, which is just as well as the drain pipe is quite clogged and rusty. Whilst I consider the next step in my plumbing problem, you can listen to another innocent story, The Magician, or Till Death Do Us Part.
It was hard to imagine why Jenny thought the magician in the circus attractive. He had large, bulging eyes, a high-domed forehead, and a thin slit of a mouth which twitched slightly all the time. But dressed in his top hat and wearing a red silk lined cape, he was everything a poor romantic little farm girl could ask for, especially a little farm girl whose life was one dreary day of drudgery after another. Perhaps it was the strange, hypnotic feeling she had when he said, "Jenny, eh? What a pretty name. What a pretty girl. And you say you would like a job as my assistant in the circus? Come in, Jenny." She stepped into his wagon and looked about, and was so entranced by what she saw that she was only dimly aware of the door swinging shut and the lock clicking behind her. The room was filled with strange things. A bat bobbing in a large jar of alcohol. Pictures of strange creatures with 5 legs and 6 eyes. On the walls, strangely colored charts of the sun and the stars. The windows draped with a thick purple gauze. A mummified cat baring its teeth. And huddled on an old bent chair in one corner was a young girl of about her own age. "I was just talking to Esmeralda here," said the magician. "She's been a bad girl, haven't you, my pet?" "I won't stay here any longer," said the girl in a tearful voice. "That's one," said the magician, his mouth twitching a bit more than usual. "I won't be your assistant any longer," said Esmeralda. "That's 2, twitched the magician as he took a step toward the girl. Jenny whispered, "What are you going to do?" The magician turned his large eyes on her and said, "I'll be with you in a moment, my dear." Esmeralda ran to the door, but it was locked. "Let me go," she screamed. The magician waved a long, bony finger at the girl and said, "That's 3." With that, there was a blinding flash. Jenny looked, and there, where a moment before stood a pretty young girl, was a squeaking white mouse. The magician pounced on the mouse and chuckled. He picked it up and walked to a small closet. He opened the door and took out a cage that was filled with white mice. He dropped Esmeralda in the cage and put it away. He turned and moved toward Jenny. "And now, my dear, what was it you were saying?" he said. Jenny ran to the door and started to hammer at it with her fists. She turned and said, "You terrible, horrible man doing such an awful thing. I wouldn't be your assistant if you were the last magician on earth." The magician shook his finger at her, smiled, and said quietly, "That's 1."
Well, the water is well up over my ankles, but I managed to find an old set of hip boots. At least the rugs and floors here will get a good washing down. Now here's a story called Johnny Takes a Dare, or The More the Merrier.
best thing about the new house they were building down by the woods at the other end of town was that there wasn't any watchman. You know how cool it is to play in a house that's being built? All that sand and all those wooden beams over the cellar that you can walk tightrope on? The kind of playing that it's a good thing parents don't know anything about, because if they did, they'd have a fit. Well, it all happened on a Saturday in the summertime, the time of year when you have dinner and still have a few hours of daylight left to play in. Johnny, a husky 10-year-old, and his pals were playing King of the Hill on the sand pile by the new home. And Johnny was doing a pretty good job of being the king. As they wrestled up and down, the sun slowly set through the trees and cast long, shadowy fingers across the unfinished house and the great piles of unused lumber. The darker it got, the brighter glowed the red warning lantern which the workmen had left behind, until finally everything was bathed in an eerie red glow. Finally, the game stopped, and the boys, breathing heavily, looked about them. "Gee, it's scary, isn't it?" one of the boys said with wide eyes. "Nothing to be scared of," said Johnny, who liked to think that he wasn't scared of anything. One of the boys whispered, "Gee, fellas, think I'll just head on home." "Oh, yeah," whispered another boy. "I'll bet that you get out of here as fast as we do." Johnny yawned and stretched. "I don't know, fellas. Maybe I'll just spend the night here," the whispering boy said. "Go on. I just dare you to." "What'll you give me if I do?" said Johnny, who liked to take dares to show how brave he was. "My new scout knife," whispered the boy as he edged toward the road home. "Sure," said Johnny, "like taking candy from a baby. Drop off and tell my folks I'm camping out for the night." Johnny looked around and started for the unfinished house. He was startled for a moment as he saw a great shadow moving against the side of it, but laughed weakly to himself as he realized it was his own shadow caused by the red lantern light. One room was almost finished. At least it had a floor and a roof on. "Good a place as any," said Johnny to himself as he found a clear place on the floor and settled down. The wind blew crisply through the open doors and windows. There was just a sliver of a moon, but it was quickly covered by a swift-moving cloud. Soon there was no light at all, but the red lantern glowed against the opposite wall. After a while, Johnny thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, because the red lantern light seemed to be getting dimmer and dimmer. What was that? He heard the sound of scratching from the next room. It got louder and louder. Then around the corner scurried a squirrel. "Phew," said Johnny half to himself. The squirrel looked at Johnny and almost grinned. At least Johnny thought he did. And he settled back again. What was that? Scratching again. Louder this time. Then he saw a shadow move slowly into the doorway. It was another squirrel, but it was as big as a cat. Johnny pretended to be asleep. The big squirrel pattered over to the little squirrel and spoke to him.
"Hello there, Henry. Well, what are we going to do with him?"
Good evening, Clarence.
"We'll wait until Charlie comes,"
said the little squirrel. And they both turned and grinned in Johnny's direction. Through half-closed eyes, Johnny thought that their teeth were awfully long and that he didn't care so much about that new scout knife. A few moments later, there was some more scratching. Pretty loud this time. And in the door came a squirrel as big as a sheepdog. He shuffled over to the others and nodded in greeting.
Henry? Clarence? What'll we do with him?"
Henry piped up.
"Like I just told Clarence here, George. I'll wait till Charlie comes."
George nodded and grinned at Johnny, who was beginning to have some doubts about this whole adventure. He was beginning to wish he was home in his own bed when he heard a heavy noise. And in through the door came a squirrel as big as a good-sized pony. His bushy tail brushed the top of the door as he entered. He lumbered over to the other three and sat up, and his head almost touched the ceiling. He said,
"Hello, Clarence. George. Oh, I didn't see you there, Henry. Well, what are we going to do with him?"
The other three said,
Hello, Cecil. Wait till Charlie comes.
Then they all turned toward Johnny, but before they could grin at him, Johnny leaped to his feet, and as he ran wildly out the door, he shouted, "Tell